Today in Flex in the City, we interview David Bauer, Global Head of Institutional Sales at FE Fundinfo. A farmer's son explains why purpose and a sustainable growth mindset is critical for the investment industry. All that happening right now in Flex and the City.
Hello, everybody. This is Rachel Treese for Flex in the City. This is the podcast where we interview great leaders in the financial services industry. And today I have the very great pleasure of interviewing David Bauer, who is the Global Head of Institutional Sales at FE Fundinfo. So hello, David. A big welcome to you.
Hi, and it's great to join you, Rachel.
Great to join you too. And whereabouts are you sitting right now as we do this interview in continued lockdowns, pandemic time, etc.? I can't believe I'm still saying that a year on.
I know we thought we'd have our physical client conference by now, but everything's digital. So I'm still at home, which is quite useful in terms of connecting with many jurisdictions where I have team members, getting used to it, and the habit's certainly building. So I'm just south of Gatwick in the United Kingdom.
Very good. So tell us a little bit more about you. I know that you've had a huge career in financial services. You're working for the likes of, Invesco, BlackRock, consultancy. So it'd be lovely to hear a little bit about your story and how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Well, look, if we're defined by what we do, my day is currently taken up through my role, as you've highlighted, as Global Head of Institutional Sales at FE Fundinfo. So we'll come on to FE Fundinfo a little later, I presume. I find myself here having had a split career, if you like, between consultancy, business advisory, and line management in the investment sector. I started out, as many people do, working for one of the big four, and I joined their consultancy division following graduation. And for a couple of years, I worked on lots of diverse, exciting projects. I think within a week of joining Ernst & Young back then, I was working for Polygram, flying around Europe very unsustainably compared to how we're operating now. Designing a new sales order process for their record distribution. Anyway, none of that was interesting enough. And a couple of years later, more through luck than judgment, started to specialize in the investment industry. And the rest is history. I never left. And I often say that to the graduates joining our business, that you're coming into a sector which tends to hold you for the rest of your career.
Absolutely.
We'll talk a little bit about that later. So I then consulted. A group of us set up our own company after Ernst & Young, which we took to a trade sale. We went into a large technology integration consulting business that bought us. And from there, I decided to leave consulting and go into line management into one of my clients. And I joined what was then a little known brand in the sort of retail space, but the largest fund management company in the world, which was Barclays Global Investors. And I joined a division that was also little known called iShares, which was the innovator for the mass distribution of exchange-traded funds. I took several sales marketing roles. I eventually was the European head of marketing for iShares, latterly then the European marketing director for BlackRock, before I then moved to Invesco, where I had a similar role for several years as the European marketing director, before I found myself here at FE Fundinfo. On the personal side, a little bit about me. A surprising fact, perhaps, now so few people work in agriculture, is I'm a farmer's son.
We love surprising facts. You're a farmer's son. Wow. Tell us more.
Yeah, so maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that. But I come from an agricultural background, and that's a very working agricultural background. I think I was thinking about it from a very early age. It wasn't when was I big enough to drive the Land Rover so my father could throw feed off to his dairy cows. It was how big a cushion could he find so that I could just steer the Land Rover. He put it in gear and off I'd go because I couldn't reach the pedals. And frankly, for me and my brothers, that was our upbringing. We were cheap labor for my father, but we never complained, and it was actually something that I loved. But coming to the end of my childhood, I decided farming wasn't for me, and I just had a broad objective, if you like, or motivation to go into business without too much definition of what that actually meant. And then I made the choices that took me into business, which then took place. I'm a father of 3 children now, coming into university age for the eldest. So that keeps me busy in my personal life.
Very good. And it sounds like the agriculture background maybe gave you a sort of a taste for an entrepreneurial way of being.
I think farmers, although lots of things will come into people's minds when they think of agriculture, it's a very self-reliant, lonely occupation.
Oh,
and
okay.
Open to, lots of externalities in terms of the outcomes that you're able to deliver year after year. So it is recognized that agricultural backgrounds do generate an oversupply or their greater share of sort of entrepreneurial spirited individuals, which I often read with interest. And I see that in a lot of the friends that I have who also have that background.
Absolutely. So coming from farming, how has that helped motivate you? And has it given you any specific core values which drive you in the workplace?
I think farmers have to be very commercial, very self-reliant. And that is where I generate my motivation from. I love building businesses. That's what I've always done. I love facing off to clients, which is why I'm today in sales, and I flip-flopped between marketing and sales over my career. I see them as two sides of the same coin. So I think it has influenced me. And building businesses, whether it be consulting businesses or investment businesses or investment infrastructure businesses, in the way that FE Fundinfo positions ourselves, that's what I enjoy every day. It's designing, making, and then selling and marketing great products, and meeting the needs, and solving problems, whatever they may be, which is, why people are buying our products and services. That gives me a huge amount of satisfaction.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you've got that background and you've worked at these different types of organizations. What kind of different perspectives does that bring for you? How does that help you in a leadership role?
I think across the investment industry, I've worked in all elements of it, with one exception where I've had some experience. So I've worked in investment manufacture itself for some of the world's largest asset managers. I've worked in distribution in Sanlam, where I consulted for a fair amount of time in a financial advisory and private client discretionary business. And I'm now working in an infrastructure business, providing technology and data to the industry. A part of the industry that I haven't worked in is in the actual capital markets, so the sell side. Although in the way that exchange traded funds are manufactured, they interplay with the capital markets in a way that traditional funds don't. So I did have significant exposure to the capital markets, but it's not where I've worked directly. And I think that means that you can see how the players in the value chain are interacting with each other, where they're contributing to end products that deliver value for end investors, and can really see the dynamics of how the investment industry operates, which is different to many other consumer sectors in respect of how the end user accesses our products and in fact is motivated themselves to use our products. It's a unique industry that you have to have worked across different parts of it to truly understand how it's working.
So as you know, Flex in the City is about leadership. I'd love to ask you a little bit more about the most inspiring leaders, maybe in financial services and in the broader world. You're not allowed to say Paul Brady or Martin Cuff because they've been on this show, so you can't say them. So yeah, can you help me?
Well, hopefully I won't say someone else who's been on your show, Rachel. And I'd love to call out those two gentlemen. From outside the industry, I think the leader who I have most respect for would be Nelson Mandela. Being brought up through the 80s and 90s, lived through, from an observation point of view, the brutality of the apartheid regime. And you had someone who came through to lead a united South Africa to forgive, not to forget, but to forgive, to create a better future for a nation, and to do it in such a generous, spirited manner. I think he would stand out for me as my leader outside of the sector. Within the sector, the leader who I've viewed again from afar would be John Bogle at Vanguard, the founder of Vanguard. Came into contact with Vanguard because of the index industry and BGI's position as the world's largest passive manager back when I joined them. And Vanguard's claim, which is correct, that they created the first mutual fund, index mutual fund, but BGI's claim through their acquisition of Wells Fargo that they had created the first segregated index strategy for Samsonite a couple of years before. So we were always sparring with Vanguard in the claim of heritage. And John Bogle has truly changed the industry by developing a product set and an approach to fees and client outcomes, which I highly respect. I've had the great pleasure of working with lots of talented individuals, from the individual who recruited me into Ernst & Young originally, who, I may get this slightly wrong, but he retires next year, which is a slight wake-up call for me, that the first partner who recruited me is now retiring. And
Wow.
we're still in contact today, which I think is a sign of great leadership, that people follow. That is, for me, a definition of a leader, that you can inspire people to follow you through discretionary choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then right the way to the present day, and my current chief executive and management team, who have some superb qualities as well as leaders.
Absolutely. And what about yourself? What do you stand for as a leader?
I bring a style that is very inclusive. I put that down in part to my history in consulting, where I became a skilled facilitator of large groups of people to bring out the best in clients when we were problem solving and generating ideas for how to improve businesses, which inherently was why we were employed ultimately. And I think that facilitation style has brought into my leadership. And I therefore, want to see everybody empowered and to take responsibility for what they are employed and part of a team to deliver. So that for me is very important. I tend to lead by example.
Mm-hmm.
I want to actually be close to the team and the expectations that I'm putting on them. I would never put expectations on individuals that I wouldn't put on myself. I have been told that I don't potentially hold people to the standards that I hold for myself, but we're all, always learning as leaders. And that is something that I continue to focus on. So for me, it's about those characteristics, I think. And then ultimately, will people follow you? Will the outcome be that they follow you in, the ideas that you're generating and the strategy that you're setting, and that you've given them that clarity to take responsibility and be accountable for their work and the outcomes that you're trying to deliver.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about the fact that we're always learning when we're in leadership roles. That's absolutely, I totally get that. So I'd love to move on now to the industry, and the industry, like the rest of the world, is going through huge amounts of transformation. So what is the big thing that you'd be looking out for in terms of that sort of change or transformation in the industry? What do you think is needed?
I think post-financial crisis, the investment industry, like other sectors in financial services, has been pulled through a huge amount of change from the regulator and policymakers. It was happening before as well. If you recall, it was in the mid-noughties that the then chair of the FCA came out with the mandate to remove commission from financial advice. And we'd previously had other significant changes in the retail industry in the UK, but this is sweeping through other jurisdictions as well. So I think the change agenda has been there for some time. I think that the change that we're now facing, now that a lot of that post-financial crisis regulation has been put into place, is the existential crisis that society faces around the environment and the damage that we've done and we continue to do to the environment. And policymakers really focusing in not just on action that governments and institutions are able to take, but also how private capital in the public markets and private markets is being deployed into enterprises that are driving sustainable business models. And there's been regulation, to look at influencing companies themselves, both quoted and unquoted companies themselves, to be more sustainable sector by sector. And now the focus is on investors to also be putting greater consideration of environmental factors into their investment policies and investment objectives. And that is the huge change that all of us in the investment industry will be both reacting to and, I hope, leading on a decade plus viewpoint moving forward from here in 2021. That is going to be, for me, the number one focus above all else for the investment industry, whilst we continue to improve ourselves around ironing out conflicts of interest, better transparency, better consumer outcomes from the products that we manufacture and market to our investors and beneficiaries.
And David, is financial services doing enough to connect with those investors and potential employees? Is there something else we can be doing?
There's always something else. Coming up with it is the challenging piece. I've looked at this for many, many years as a marketeer, which is, if we took ourselves as an FMCG marketplace, individuals spend all of their time thinking about how they're going to spend money and very little time about how they're going to save money. I think there's great analogies of people spend more time planning for their annual summer holiday on a one-off basis than they do planning for their savings for an entire lifetime. So there's a complete mismatch between where people spend their time in respect of savings and investments vis-a-vis spending. It's not surprising, because people get their satisfaction from spending money. And research that I've both commissioned myself and seen third party is that the vast majority of us gain no pleasure from running our finances. And as a result, we remain very disengaged from our finances. I would draw a slight separation between cash management and the management of our day-to-day cash needs versus long-term savings and risk-based investments, which is the part of the market I spend my time in. So whether we can get people to be more engaged, or whether we just have to have the mechanisms, the governance, and the industry that can face off well to a disengaged audience, we need to do that, certainly. And perhaps with better communications, with better articulation of what the industry is actually doing for individuals with their savings, they could be more engaged. But my view is it hasn't happened in my career, notwithstanding many, many pundits arguing that it will happen. It still hasn't happened. That's not to say that it won't, but it hasn't happened yet. And the question is, will it? I think maybe technology could be the facilitator to unlock greater engagement if you can somehow communicate better the journey that all of us are on with our financial futures and financial savings. I think the challenge we've got, Rachel, is that unlike virtually every other product, you're buying a product which you don't know is going to be good or bad or indifferent for many, many years into the future. Many people, by the time they start to get the feedback loop on whether they made the right choice, have forgotten why they made that choice in the first place. And I always advise to people, friends and family, when you make an investment, just write down on a piece of paper what your objective was for making that investment. Keep it in a file, and 10 years later, come back to that piece of paper and see if it's met the objective you set out. That will deliver some sort of rigor and engagement in what you're actually doing. We're too quick to forget why we took certain actions with our finances, and therefore hold to account the financial institutions that we've tasked with delivering that objective.
As a psychologist, I find this whole thing really fascinating. Again, as a psychologist and a mother as well, and I know that you're a father to 3 children. Do you think your children know what you do? And do you think your children have any interest at all? Is the industry attracting your children to want to join it?
That's a really good question. I think sadly they do know what I do, because I do talk about it to them, much to their annoyance. My eldest daughter at university is studying economics and geography and English in a Scottish university, so the sort of major minor system, so studying multiple topics. My middle daughter, who's currently studying A-levels, is doing economics, mathematics and biology, and is looking to do economics at university. So unfortunately, it looks like both of them are pursuing financial undergraduate orientated courses. And I think that does come from, in part, my discussion with them around, the subjects and vocation that they could follow. And what's happened with the economic side is they found it incredibly interesting as to how economics explains so many aspects of society and the way that society operates. My youngest son, all he understands, he's only 11, is you must buy low and sell high.
Oh,
But I do talk to him about saving and some, sort of golden rules, if you like. And he does it today. So if he's working and earning money in the small set of tasks that he's able to do today, I always say, you should save a third and spend 2/3. And actually, as a child, you should probably save more if you've got less outgoings. And so if we've just bought a game on the Xbox and it costs £6, I'll say to him, you've got to earn £9 to give yourself the ability to spend 6, so that you're putting a third away. And, people put that money away. And I think this then dovetails back to the responsibility the industry has. We do have people who save for a lifetime. And there are so many different purposes that people are using that money for, whether it be for a rainy day, whether it be for a special gift, whether it be, to put a deposit down on a house, whether it be, God forbid, that you have to go into long-term care. There are so many different reasons why people save. And it's very hard when you're in the industry to keep connected to that, those objectives that your clients have. But it's a huge responsibility as both the state and the corporate withdraw from delivering financial security or being part of our financial lives. It's more and more up to the individual. And so the industry's role has become progressively more important for every man and woman on the street in terms of what we do for them. It's no longer a preserve of the wealthy. We deliver services to all. And that comes with a certain responsibility. It also comes with a certain regulatory scrutiny and oversight. Absolutely. And we're all on the end of that scrutiny and oversight. But it needs to be there because of the role that we're playing.
Yeah, absolutely. So David, you come from a marketing background. So by the power given to me by Flex in the City, I'm going to give you the title for the rest of this podcast as the Chief Marketing Officer for the industry. And they say that it's difficult to read the label when you're inside the jar, just as you've just highlighted. So I'd like to take you out of the jar, give you the title of Chief Marketing Officer for the financial services industry. What would you do if you were the Chief Marketing Officer for the industry?
Well, I guess you've got multiple audiences that you're trying to market to. We're trying to market to future talent and employees and people who are going to come into the industry. We've got to market to our existing, the hundreds of thousands of people who work in the industry, keep them motivated, ensure they're delivering their best work. And we've got to market to investors and those who are going to commit their valuable capital into our safekeeping. I would, as a CMO, talk more about the role that we play for both institutions and individuals. And when you work in investment companies, there is a palatable acknowledgement of this role. And I think it does motivate a lot of us who work in the sector. Notwithstanding the great technicality of the sector, I think individuals are looking for more purpose. They're looking for more identification of how their work contributes, not just, to their wage packet and their careers, but also to society as a whole. And I think if I read and all the review and research is right, that we have a much more purposeful generation coming in behind us, then we as an industry are going to have to articulate that to ensure that we do get the best talent coming in and that they continue the work that, the current leaders in the industry are progressing. So that would be important to me. I think the purpose that I'd apply to the industry is to articulate something that is wider than not articulate it in financial terms, but try to articulate it in how people are trying to live their lives, live good lives, and with that, the personal freedom people have to make savings, to build capital over a lifetime is incredibly important to them leading those good lives. And that partly will explain my political persuasions as well in terms of freedom and the ability that individuals should have to look after themselves, to take responsibility for themselves. And the financial industry enables that. That is part of our political and economic system. So we as an industry have to step up to that privilege that we've been given by democratic societies to manage both institutional, non-public, basically, private capital and ensure that we have a system that delivers for all.
I love what you're saying, which is really said with passion, David. So thank you for that. On to you as a human being, when you're not being a chief marketing officer and when you're not being a dad, what do you like doing in your free time?
I think my time is spent outdoors if I possibly can. That's why lockdown for me has been a real struggle over the winter months without being able to travel to places where winter is actually a good thing, aka mountains and snow.
Yeah.
So I've struggled somewhat in the last few months, but the darkest hour is before the dawn. We're about to have our summertime clocks changed here in the UK or move to summertime.
Yeah.
So I can see the end is in sight, and I'm feeling fairly spring-like in my outlook. So I like to spend my time outdoors as much as I possibly can, in lots and lots of different activities. Whether it be through gardening, playing sport, walking. Walking is the new lunching, Rachel.
Yeah.
You mentioned
absolutely.
Paul.
Yes.
Recently been walking with Paul.
Yeah.
We happen to live fairly close to each other.
Okay.
So walking is the new lunch. It's the new dinner. It's the new coffee. So I think we should all invest in better walking boots and spend that time that we were spending in restaurants and other social locations and start walking more.
I didn't catch
Very
that.
good.
Could you try?
Somebody's talking to you.
That's my watch.
There you go. That you see that we are in a world of technology. Even your watch is talking.
That's the Siri on my watch, Rachel. Sorry.
There you go.
One thing I didn't turn off.
So a question. You talked about gardening, and you come from an agricultural background. So I'm curious, what could the financial services industry learn from the earth, learn from agriculture, and learn from gardening? What would you say?
Well, I think agriculture, like every other industry, can be sustainable or non-sustainable. And if you look at agriculture, we can look at it through, a fairly soft lens, and idealized lens of sustainability and intergenerational activity, if you like. The reality of farming, like every other sector, is driven by incentives. And if you look at how farming has evolved to become very environmentally aware, you have to look at the incentives that have been applied in agriculture to drive the industry in that direction. And here in the UK, on a post-Brexit view, where we've got a wholesale change coming to the incentive schemes that we previously been part of it as part of the European Union, we're talking about changing those incentive schemes. But looking at farming, if I just go into that a moment, post-war, we had to feed the nation, and farmers were told to produce as much as possible, and the environment was decimated as a result. Hedges, millions of miles of hedgerows were pulled out to make larger fields. The industrialization of farming took place, and the environment suffered as a result of that. It's very well documented. All forms of wildlife, biodiversity, etc. Once we had rotated away from production subsidies towards environmental subsidies, where now if you work to environmental standards, you can generate higher subsidies than the basic payments that you get for agricultural ownership. The industry completely rotated, and I think incentives, therefore, that's the takeaway for me. If we're going to change the industry, you've got to make sure you've got the right incentives to drive the right behavior. And the industry, has dealt with commission in terms of an incentive to ensure that individuals are taking a fiduciary responsibility to their clients, and that the interests get aligned. There's still more to do on that going forward. And then from a going back to the previous point on the environmental objectives that the industry is going to have to deliver, we'll both be driven by regulation, which will cover things like transparency, but also quotas and obligations that will drive the industry. And what the industry should be doing is not come kicking and screaming, but be ahead of it, be at the table with policymakers to generate those policies to achieve those strategic outcomes that society wants from the industry. That would be my analogy to draw.
Wow, I think our listeners will definitely have something to think about. David Bauer, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us and with all the listeners on Flex in the City.
And, thoroughly enjoyed seeing you, Rachel. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
You just listened to Flex in the City. Catch us on our next episode.